Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by John Gibson. And now the season is over. We're going to bring back our mini series, which was called Let's Talk About, where we talk about a certain subject linked to Newcastle United. We talk about it in depth and we really just kind of chew the fat on it. Now, we are going to start the new series of this mini series talking about a man who we have discussed before. I actually think he might have been the first or second person we discussed, John, when we first launched the Let's Talk About series. And it is Kieran Trippier, because there is plenty of discussion about his future at Newcastle United. And I'm really intrigued to get John's viewpoint on Newcastle's right back. Will Kieran Trippier still be at Newcastle come the start of the season? What does the future hold for him? John, when people hear me ask about Kieran Trippier's future and even pose the question about him still being here next season, some will be scratching their heads. But given his age, and I know he's 33, so am I. I suspect he's a lot fitter than I am. I certainly couldn't be playing week in, week out. But that being said, he hasn't been playing week in, week out. We'll get into depth about the reasons and the what, hows and what have you. But asking the question about Kieran Trippier's future at Newcastle United, is it a valid question to be asking?
It most certainly is, because football's a harsh world, and really it's all about making difficult decisions. The easy decisions are exactly that, they're easy. The hard decisions are the big ones that open up. And if we have to look at, as we're told we must, the financial fair play situation at St James's Park, which almost inevitably, as we build up our financial resources, mean perhaps sacrificing senior players to get more senior players in. We do with Maxi, of course. And if we have to do it now, who could we afford to lose without it having a huge impact? Because we don't want to lose Isaac, and we don't want to lose Bruno, and we don't want to lose Anthony Gordon. So who would be the other three? Now, we generally accept that Miggy Almiron could be one of those, and that Callum Wilson, because of his injury record, could be another. But I would suggest Kieran Trippier might be a third. And I say that with something of a heavy heart, and I say it realizing that a few people will be absolutely aghast and horrified at the thought that that could be so, because he has been an immense trailblazer for us. I mean, we owe him so much. He agreed to come here when perhaps a lot of players wouldn't. Right at the start of this new regime, when we were fighting relegation. In one of the first matches he played in, we played Cambridge at home in the FA Cup and lost. That's how bad we were when he came. He had just won La Liga with Atletico Madrid, beating Barcelona and Real Madrid, who are the heavyweights of Spanish football. And he come back here and was willing to nail his colours to our mast before anybody else did. In fairness, Bruno did almost straight away, etc., and they opened the door for others to come. So we owe him so much. He's been terrific. He's been a great ambassador. He's a free kick expert. He's been a terrific captain, because that's what he's done with Lascelles out so often. He's captained the side. He's a dressing room rouser. Everything about him puts a club first rather than Kieran Trippier first. But if I'm honest about the situation, we would have to consider selling him this summer for two reasons in my book, Andrew. One is age and the other is contract. He is actually 34 in September. He's 33 now, but he's 34 in September when the season starts. Immediately season starts within a month. He's 34. Also, his contract runs out at the end of next season. So if you're going to get any monetary value out of Trippier in terms of cash, it would have to be now, before his contract runs out and he has a free, and at the age of 34. Because if we wait a year, he'll be coming up to 35, and his value financially will be hugely down. It's tough, and I almost feel uncomfortable saying it, because of the way it'll be received by some people. But it's true. It is also true for two other reasons. First of all, because of age and because of contract. Secondly, because we've already got his replacement in Tino Livramento, who would pop into the right back position and look immaculate and look a Rolls Royce, so it wouldn't be weakening right back. And that is very unusual, to let a top player go and not have to scurry around looking to buy a like for like replacement. And the second is, at the end of the last transfer window, and both he and Callum Wilson were flirting with the idea of leaving. It had been suggested. They didn't poo-poo it and say under no circumstances. Funny enough, the guy that probably did that was Miggy, who was quite horrified and didn't want to go to Saudi. But both Callum and Kieran give it consideration, and then threw their weight wholeheartedly into staying with Newcastle, but to give it consideration. So it didn't seem like a horrendous thing to them that they would get a Leicester or somewhere else. But I think we've got to seriously contemplate that if at any stage we are to cash in on Kieran Trippier, it has to be now, not a year's time.
And I don't want anyone to get us wrong. We're big fans of Kieran Trippier. We
Oh,
appreciate
massive.
everything that he's done at Newcastle United. As John said, he was the catalyst. He took the first step when no one else had done, and he was probably the reason, or part of the reason, the likes of Bruno Guimaraes and co followed, because Kieran Trippier is a big name in world football, very talented right back. But when you are an elite side, John, or you have hopes of being an elite side, it's these kind of tough decisions where there's no room for sentimentality that need to be made. And we've seen Eddie Howe actually make those decisions this week with the exits of Matt Ritchie and Paul Dummett. We know really that he wanted to keep them in an ideal world because he appreciated their experience. He wasn't really wanting to keep them because of first team action, but more what they brought off the pitch. So Eddie Howe has shown that ruthlessness, and he may have to show it with Kieran Trippier. You mentioned there the bid from Bayern Munich in January, and at the time it was something that split the opinion across the fan base. I was in the camp that actually I think I probably would have maybe cashed in on Kieran Trippier. I know that wasn't the overall viewpoint, but I do wonder now, and again, with all due respect to Kieran Trippier, whether people's opinions have changed, and in hindsight, they also may have cashed in on Trippier at the time, and whether actually, John, Kieran Trippier might now be thinking, should I have gone in January? Should I have made the push to go?
I think that is absolutely fair comment. I think it's much more difficult, Andrew, for Eddie Howe to make a decision on Trippier than it is to make a decision on Dummett and Ritchie, because in all fairness, Dummett and Ritchie have been the padding, if you like, beneath the first team in the squad, in the 9-man bench. They've been the padding. This guy is still very much part of the first team itself. So I think it would be much more difficult. And I've got to be truthful. If Trippier was willing to stay and be used as a squad player rather than as an automatic first teamer, like Bruno and like Isaac and like Gordon, but a squad player that might spend some time on the bench, and it didn't affect Newcastle's ability to buy this summer, I'd be quite happy for him to stay. And I would with Wilson as well. If Wilson would sit there as the number 3 striker and they brought in a second striker, that would be fine. But if we have to sell to make way for buying, then you've got to bite the bullet. A lot of people would have liked Maxi to stay and add other things, but we couldn't. Somebody had to leave. And if somebody's got to leave this time, I would ask Newcastle fans, is it better that it's Trippier and Callum Wilson than Isaac or Bruno? If some senior players got to go, it is better to be those two rather than the next two. And of course, because of age, Trippier and Callum Wilson, for that matter, will be worth nothing in a year's time because of contract situation. So if you're going to get some sort of fee, it would have to be now, as tough as it is, to get rid of somebody who's been a wonderful servant and can continue to be a servant. But I would suggest two more reasons, if I may, Andrew, for this thinking. First, are you going to hold Livramento back for another season? He is ready for the first team, by the way. He is ready for the first team. His quality is the next 10 years for Newcastle United. Him and Hall, age-wise, if they decide to stay with the club and if they continue to make progress, they could become the David Craig and Frank Clark of Newcastle United modern times. So do you hold back Livramento? And as harsh as it may sound, did we see a little rustiness in Kieran towards the end of last year when he made two horrendous mistakes at Everton that cost us goals and we lost heavily at Everton? And then, of course, we went out of the League Cup at Chelsea with a mistake in the 92nd minute. Now, I hasten to add, before anybody jumps on top of us, that all footballers make mistakes. We know that. It is the curse of football. You have a hero one day, a villain the next day. That happens. And I'm not suggesting we didn't win the League Cup because of Kieran Trippier. That would be absurd. I'm not suggesting we didn't get in Europe because of the points that we're giving up at Goodison. That would be absurd. Mistakes are made even by the greatest players in the world. But maybe we're just, you see, it happens to everyone. And I hated this business of age catching up. I hated when it happens. I used to sit and watch George Best, and I saw him in his pomp at Manchester United and said, good God, this fella's better than the four Beatles. Better looking and a better footballer for certain. This fella was a genius. And then I saw him at Fulham and later in his career and up at Hibs, and I almost cried to see a good player not as good. I did it with Gaza. I sat at Newcastle United and watched Ian Rush in a black and white shirt. I would have given anything in the world for Ian Rush to be in a black and white shirt. But 5 years earlier, the guy that was at Liverpool and was magnificent at Liverpool wasn't the guy we signed and played at Newcastle United. It catches up with him. You know the only person that beat age, Andrew? Alan Shearer. Alan Shearer. He got the goals record just as the rust was appearing on those big thighs of his. If he'd had to go another season for the goals record, I think he would have struggled. He got the goals record just in time. He beat age, and didn't he know it? He quit immediately. Absolutely perfect. But that's really timing it, And I don't want that to happen with Trippier, with Callum Wilson. I love the memories I've got. And as I say, and I'll emphasize again, if they can sit on the bench and come in, and they'll get 20 games in a season over all the competitions, and it doesn't affect our buying, then that's great. But when he looks at Kieran Trippier, Eddie, he's also got to look at Tino Livramento.
Yeah. Well, there's a few points I just want to ask you. I mean, it's interesting you put forward the proposal that he could play second choice to Tino Livramento. And I mean, I made the claim last August that Tino Livramento would be the first choice right back for the 2024-25 campaign. Not many people could see where I was coming from, but I think I'm going to be proved right come August. The question there, though, is, John, is whether Kieran Trippier would be happy sitting on the bench. I'm not for one moment suggesting he would be disruptive, because I don't think he's that sort of character, but more whether he would look at and think, well, I still think I've got a couple of years left at the top level. Do I want to effectively waste it playing second choice? And also whether there would be a knock at Eddie Howe's door from those above him and saying, well, we can't really afford to have a player who is maybe the second, third highest paid player at Newcastle United being sitting on the bench, because that's a lot of money going in his back pocket where he's not being used, and that could be better utilised elsewhere. So there's lots of factors into that way of thinking of Kieran Trippier playing second fiddle. And also you talk about age catching up with him. I suspect as well, and I don't know Kieran Trippier personally, but I suspect he'd be the first to kind of hold his hands up and go, okay, maybe it has caught up with me. Maybe it is time to move on, a bit like Kevin Keegan did when he retired from Newcastle United. But I think the most interesting thing, John, is Kieran Trippier is probably going to be first choice left back in the Euros for England, because Gareth Southgate, bizarrely, he's only taken Luke Shaw and Kieran Trippier. So you've got one man who's coming back from injury, who's played a few games at the end of the season, hasn't looked his old self in Kieran Trippier. And you've got another, your first choice left back, who hasn't played since February and probably won't be fit enough to play. So I think Gareth Southgate's made a mistake there, but it will probably be Kieran Trippier who starts there, and will really get to see, I think, just where he's at. And if he has a bad tournament, that might reaffirm certain people's opinions on the future of Kieran Trippier at Newcastle United. It might change people's opinions. If he has a good tournament, which I hope he does, then my opinion will probably change and think, okay, well, actually, he has still got something to offer. And he has still got something to offer. It's just more whether Newcastle United cash in now if they get a decent offer, because they certainly won't get the same amount of money from that Bayern Munich were offering, 16, 20 million, whatever it was. I think you'd be lucky to get 10, 12 million for Trippier. And in the world of FFP, John, there's a decision to be made there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, he would have to be one of 2 to 3 to go to boost the financial situation at Newcastle United, because you're not going to get a big fee off Kieran Trippier at this stage. What it also comes down to, as you rightly said, when I said, he could sit around, be number 2, be back up, and so could Callum Wilson. That is, if they wished it to be, and Newcastle United could afford it with the wages, but they might have to get rid of the wages as well as get a transfer fee. It would be up to him if he wanted to play or not. I can never understand players that don't want to play. I never quite understood Paul Dummett. I think loyalty is a wonderful, wonderful thing. He is a Geordie, although he got a few Welsh caps, but that was through ancestry. He wasn't born down there. He's an out and out Geordie. But the last 2 years he's hardly played. And you know what? You're a long time retired. Don't retire yourself too early. He's hardly played. And if I was Trippier, and I'm not, but if I was Trippier or I was Wilson, I would want to be playing, because I would say I'm going to be a long time retired, and I might be retired in 2 years' time. So let's play. So, let me go and have a last hurrah. It was interesting that in the last transfer window, neither of them showed a great reluctance to leave. They considered it, him and Wilson. Miggy was horrified. So, it might well be that they would consider it again now. I mean, the reason why Kieran, I suspect, has made such a huge effort to get fit at the end of the season, but also not to come back too early, because so many people have broken down, and he's seen Sven Botman do that, etc., is because he knows this is his last hurrah with England. This is his last big tournament with England, the Euros. After that, the show's over. You might play in a couple of friendlies, you may not, but this is his last hurrah. And it could be he's approaching his last club hurrah as well. And because of who he is, and because he's such a good egg, and because he's such a great influencer, there would be clubs wanting him to help them do what he's helped happen at Newcastle United. So he would find the club all right. But in a year's time, he'll find the club on a free transfer, because, his contract's up. So if he is to move 34 in September, which is effectively next season, at the start of next season, then it's got to be now if Newcastle are going to get money. Otherwise, it's a matter of just getting somebody off the payroll. And Newcastle need a little bit more than just getting people off the payroll. They need a few quid in.
And it would be a big decision, though, wouldn't it? It is a big decision, and it would be a big loss on one hand, because you're losing, as you've mentioned, John, a real leader. And Newcastle have already lost 2 of those in Matt Ritchie and Paul Dummett. So that kind of leadership group is slowly being dismantled. And on one hand, it has to happen. You have to be ruthless, as I've mentioned, no room for sentimentality. But to lose your vice captain in what is a very important season as well, because this is I would say in the eyes of some, a kind of make or break season for Newcastle United and Eddie Howe. No European football. So many people say, well, no excuses. Top six is a must at the very least, and a good run in both cup competitions. You've got no excuse. You haven't got midweek games. So if you're Eddie Howe and someone comes in with a 10 million bid for Kieran Trippier, what are you saying? Are you saying, well, actually, Amanda, me, Dad, PIF, I kind of need Kieran Trippier because this is a seismic season in the long term picture of Newcastle United, and I don't care if we have to sell him next season for 5 million. What he can offer in the next 12 months is worth more.
You'll not get 5 million next season. He's out of contract. He'll be on a free. He'll be on a free. But football, I follow your theory completely. But, that's wearing belt and braces. In football, sometimes you've got to fly without either. It's shifting sands. And as a generalisation, not talking about Kieran in particular, on a generalisation, football's a roundabout, isn't it? It's going round and round, and people get off and other people get on. If you lose people that are terrific in the dressing room, like Richie and like Dummett and like Trippier, or eventually like Lascelles, you may be diluting the current band of organisers, but presumably the people you buy are going to be of that quality and that moral backbone and that correct type of character that they not only come into the club, but they come into the leadership band as well. It's got to change. You cannot hold back like King Canute the tide. You can't say, well, we'll take 5 years off Richie and he's just 30, and we'll take it off Dummett and we'll keep Kieran, and then we've got this wonderful leadership. Aye, but what have you got on the field then? You've got an over 30s team on the field then. And by the way, what we've got to also remember, and I've brought up a couple of times, is what do you tell Tino? Sorry, mate, you sit out for another year because this is going to happen, and you'll get the odd game, but maybe it's the season after you'll become a regular. It is difficult to keep everybody happy. That is the difficulty of management, and that's what's going to happen. And it might just be because we've been warned by Mr. Eales and by Eddie Howe that tough decisions have got to be made, and we have got to face the facts. We being the fans have got to face the facts that some top players may have to go for us to be able to progress and move forward. Well, who are those top players going to be? They're not Dummett and Richie. They were yesterday's top players. They're not the ones. Somebody like Maxi who had to leave, who leaves this time? Well, I would suggest you've only got Almiron or Wilson or Trippier that would cause the least damage by leaving. The others, I mean, if we got rid of Bruno or Isaac, what would we be facing next season? Who are the two that could easily go if necessary? Isaac scores 25 goals, looks like Thierry Henry, loads of people would take him. Bruno's worth 100 million. We can't stop him going if somebody bids 100 million, unless Bruno didn't want to go himself. So, I mean, who would we prefer to go? In damage limitation. It doesn't mean that the players that might go aren't terrific players and aren't somebody that leaves with sadness. This is quite unique. In the old days, it didn't used to happen because you didn't used to have financial fair play to think about. Now you have. I mean, Eddie regularly says he wishes he hadn't had to get rid of Maxi, but he had to. The same might apply now in terms of somebody going. It may be that it's just one and it's Callum Wilson, or that it's Mickey. Who knows? But, you've got to be prepared, and you've got to safeguard your crown jewels, which are the three players who mentioned, Gordon, Bruno and Isaac, and you've got to encourage your young players like Tino that there is a future here.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think the way Tino Livramento finished the season before he picked up that injury, he's got to be a shoe-in to start at right back in the new season. And that does, as you've mentioned there, kind of soften the blow if indeed Kieran Trippier did depart. I mean, obviously you've mentioned there the fact that age is catching up on him. He suffered a few injuries, John. He played 39 times in all competitions last season. The season before, he played all 38. He played 38 times for Newcastle United. I mean, is the injuries a slight concern, or is that just part and parcel of football?
Well, it's a funny old world, Andrew, because the injuries are a huge concern to Newcastle. And who is there that haven't had them this season? I think Bruno, Gordon, right until the end when he went out, it only missed games through suspension, and that was the Bruno situation. But you can count on one hand people where you can say, is injury not a concern? Is it a concern with Pope? Is it a concern with Botman? Is it a concern with Longstaff and Willock? Is it a concern with Joe Linton? And I mean, everybody's got that injury concern. But yes, as you get older, that's a concern. But a bigger concern with me is, seeing the early signs of perhaps things not being as good as they were. If we have been, I mean, what is indisputable is our defence hasn't been as tight as it was a year ago, when it was the best record in the Premier League, and this season has been anything but. And you see mistakes catch up a little bit. The two big clangers at Everton that were very costly, quickly followed in the same month, December, with the mistake at Chelsea that got us eventually to penalties and knocked out of the League Cup at the quarter-final stage. And Kieran, bless him, by his sky-high standards, hasn't had a great 2024. And therefore, there comes a time, as tough as it is, where you've got to give each other a kiss and go your own ways. And whatever happens with Kieran, whether he stays or whether he's gone, his affection, his standing on Tyneside is as safe as houses. He will be remembered for all time whenever he leaves this club as the great saviour of the new Newcastle, because he come in first. We will be forever grateful to Kieran Trippier, as we will be to Callum Wilson, because he's a quality player when fit. But I'm sick of those two words being the end of every sentence with Callum Wilson. When fit, those two words are there at the end of every sentence. And so sometime you've got to sit down and say, it's bite the bullet time. And you know what? It's bite the bullet time for Eddie in general. Because this season, we finished 7th, we got to the quarterfinals of the 2 domestic cups, etc., etc. And with the injuries and with everything else, that was a good season. But the bottom line is no Europe. So we cannot say we've made a step forward from the last season when we finished 4th, went to the Champions League and played in a Wembley Cup final. We haven't made a step forward. It's just, have we not made one back, really, because of unique circumstances. But what this season means in a harsh world is that next season is so important it's untrue. And who is it always the most important for? The manager, because his neck's always on the line. The manager's neck's always on the line. The directors can say, well, the manager, we give him backing. I'm generalising, not meaning Newcastle. And it didn't happen. And the players can say, well, the manager wasn't so clever and didn't pick the best. The manager's neck's on the line. And Eddie knows that. And Eddie's no fool. He's a clever, clever man. And he's a deep, deep, deep thinker. And he'll be thinking everything this summer, because he knows he's got to get it right this summer, and Newcastle have got to improve on last season. You know why? Because the plank of playing a lot of matches, because we're in Europe, has been taken away from Newcastle. No excuses. Premier League in 2 domestic cups. That is it. Now, from that, Newcastle made top 4 last time. So, he's under pressure to get it right. And therefore, he's under pressure to make tough decisions and not just loyal decisions. We know how much he loves his players. We know how much he believes his whole power at Newcastle is built on this unbreakable link he's got with his dressing room. And we know that. And then if you feel like that, it is tempting to do the right thing. But there's ways of doing the right thing. He took Dummett and Ritchie, with hindsight, he took them to Aussie just because it was a farewell party over there for people like him and the two kids that have been released. He wants to keep the feeling right and to say thank you to players, etc., etc. And that's what he did. And he will handle this in the right way. You don't see players leave, with the possible exception of Ryan Fraser, and have anything bad to say about Newcastle when they leave, Maxi or anybody else, because he handles those situations well. But I tell you what, you've still got to handle them, and you've still got to make the tough decision that is best, not for Kieran Trippier or for Callum Wilson or for Isaac, but for yourself and for the club. You've got to do it for the club, but in that way, look after yourself. Because all of a sudden, if you don't, who gets it in the neck? The manager.
Yep, couldn't put it better myself. Final question then, John, final couple of questions.
Yeah.
How much would it take you to part with Kieran Trippier in the summer?
Financially, you mean?
Yeah.
You would have to get what is the best fee possible. And you're not going to get Kieran Trippier and his pump fee, because when I point out he's 34 in September and his contract's up at the end of the coming season, do you not think everybody who's going to buy him will know that as well? Well, of course they will. So they'll say, excuse me, mate, we'll take Kieran Trippier, but we're not going to pay anything over 10 or over 12. And the only reason why you might get a bit slight more for Callum Wilson is because he's a striker that scores goals, although his fitness record, you're not going to get great money for either of them. And you would probably get more money on a single deal for Miggy, because he's not quite as old as that, and he hasn't got a history of injury, great injury, persistent injury, and he's quick and flies, and so looks very fit. So, if you got, what you've got to do, I think, is decide that who can you afford to get rid of and make a couple of quid in it. It's the three guys I mentioned. I mean, they'll sell Dubovka tomorrow, but what are they going to get for him? He's 35 and a cover goalkeeper. They're not going to get a lot of dough off any of these guys, but we're not looking for the 100 million. We're looking to get rid of three, put all the money in a pot, and then buy for elsewhere. Because we don't need two great right backs like Trippier in Livramento. We need one great right back and a great centre half, or a great centre forward, or a great outside right.
Come the close of the window, John, do you think Kieran Trippier will still be a Newcastle United player?
I think it's 50-50. It depends on, there won't be a natural willingness of the manager to get rid. The manager will be of the opinion, if it happens, I'll put up with it and I will get on with life. But he'll not be looking to make certain it does happen. So I tell you what, if he is there on the opening day of the season, and the transfer window is still open then on the opening day of the season, but if he's still with us, then we get nothing from him, because he sees out the season, and the only decision to be made is whether we give him a new contract or not. Because he'll be on a free, and by Christmas he'll be able to talk to any foreign clubs. And he went over to Atletico Madrid. By the new year, he'll be able to talk to them anyway. So I think there is a chance that he'll stay. But what'll happen if he does? Who will we sacrifice then? Will the money come in? Will we have a bad window? And there's another point I would put to you, Andrew. The manager can't afford another bad transfer window. There was nothing in January. In the previous year was probably not bad, but turned out to have little immediate impact, with Bonds and Tonali not available virtually all season, and two cover fullbacks signed in Livramento and Hall. So it wasn't a great transfer window. Newcastle United need this to be a good transfer window. They really, really do.
There we go. Well, the future of Kieran Trippier will be a discussion that will rumble on throughout the summer. For you guys watching on YouTube, do let us know in the comments what you think the future holds for Kieran Trippier. Would you keep him or would you cash in? To you guys listening on the audio channel, thank you. As always, leave us a rating and review. You can get in touch via Twitter, AD Musgrovers, where I am at, or the EIBW podcast at reachplc.com if you want to leave us an email. And for myself and John, we shall see you guys next week.